It's strange how life can change in an instant. How the foundation you thought was solid can crumble beneath your feet without warning. One moment, I was a husband, a stepfather, a man building a family with a woman I loved. The next, I was walking away from all of it, leaving behind the life I thought I wanted, because sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones you never imagined you'd have to make. When I married Laura, I knew that being a stepfather to her son, David, would come with challenges. He was 12 when we met, and his father had left their lives years before, creating a hole I could never truly fill. Still, I tried. I did everything I could to build a bond with him, to be the role model he needed. I wasn't naive. I knew he would never see me as his father, but I hoped that, over time, we could develop a relationship based on mutual respect, maybe even something resembling love. For a while, it seemed like things were working. In the early days of our marriage, things were good. Laura and I had a strong connection, and though David kept his distance, I believed that, in time, he'd warm up to me. I gave him space, never pushed too hard. I went to his soccer games, helped with his homework when he asked, and tried to show him that I was there for him. It was slow, but I thought we were making progress. Then everything changed. It started with small things at first. David became more distant, more sullen, and when I asked Laura about it, she brushed it off as normal teenage behavior. He's just going through a phase, she'd say. I wanted to believe her, so I let it go. But as the months passed, the tension in our home grew. David would barely speak to me, and when he did, it was with a tone that bordered on resentment. Still, I kept trying. I told myself that this was part of the territory of being a stepfather, that eventually, things would improve. But they didn't. The day it all fell apart is still burned into my memory. I had come home from work, exhausted from a long day, hoping to relax. When I walked into the house, I could feel the tension in the air. David was sitting on the couch, arms crossed, glaring at me. Laura was standing near the kitchen, her face pale, her eyes wide with something I couldn't place at first. Before I could ask what was wrong, David spoke, his words hit me like a punch to the gut. He hit me. I stood there, stunned, trying to process what he had just said. I couldn't believe it. I had never laid a hand on him, never even raised my voice to him in anger. I was always careful, always aware of the delicate balance in our relationship. But there he was, accusing me of something I hadn't done. And the look in Laura's eyes told me that she believed him. I tried to explain, to tell her that it wasn't true, that I would never hurt him. But no matter what I said, she wouldn't listen. It was as if the bond we had built over the years had been erased in an instant. She was a mother first, and in that moment, she saw me as a threat to her son. In the days that followed, things spiraled out of control. David's accusations spread through our family and friends, and before I knew it, I was being painted as the villain. It didn't matter that I hadn't done anything. People believed what they wanted to believe, and in this case, they believed David. He was the child, after all, and I was the outsider, the stepfather. Laura and I fought constantly. I tried to make her see the truth, to understand that David was lying for reasons I couldn't comprehend. But it was no use. She was blinded by her need to protect him, to believe that he wouldn't lie about something so serious. The trust between us was shattered, and there was no way to repair it. I don't know why David made the accusation. Maybe he resented me for marrying his mother, for trying to take on a role in his life that he didn't want me to fill. Maybe it was a cry for attention, a way to push me out of their lives for good. I'll never know for sure. And maybe that's the hardest part, never knowing why he did it, why he chose to destroy everything we had built. I held on as long as I could, hoping that things would somehow get better. But the tension in our home became unbearable. Every interaction with David felt like walking on eggshells, and the distance between Laura and me grew with each passing day. She no longer looked at me the way she used to. The warmth in her eyes was gone, replaced by doubt and suspicion. It broke me. I tried to make it work for months, clinging to the hope that Laura would eventually see the truth, that David would come clean about his lie. But he never did. And one day, I realized that I couldn't live like that anymore. I couldn't stay in a marriage where I was constantly being treated as if I were guilty of something I hadn't done. So, I left. Walking away from my marriage was the hardest decision I've ever made. I love Laura, and a part of me always will, but I couldn't continue living in a home where I was viewed as a monster. The day I packed my bags and closed the door behind me, I felt a mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness for the life I was leaving behind, and relief that I was finally free from the weight of the accusation that had hung over me like a dark cloud. The aftermath of my decision wasn't easy. Friends who once welcomed me into their lives now kept their distance. Even my own family seemed unsure of how to react. Some believed me, others weren't so sure. It felt like I was constantly defending myself, trying to prove that I wasn't the person David had made me out to be. Laura and I spoke a few times after I left, but it was always strained, always filled with the unspoken tension of what had happened. She never outright said she didn't believe me, but her actions spoke louder than any words ever could. She chose David, and I understood that. As a mother, I couldn't expect anything less, but it didn't make it any easier. I thought a lot about what might have been if David hadn't made that accusation, if Laura had believed me, if we could have worked through the challenges that came with blending our family. But those are just what-ifs, and I've learned that dwelling on them doesn't change anything. The reality is that my marriage ended the moment David told that lie, and nothing could have saved it after that. Now, I live alone in a small apartment on the other side of town. It's a quiet life, far removed from the chaos of my former family. I've had a lot of time to think, to reflect on everything that happened. There are days when I wonder if I could have done something differently, if I could have somehow prevented all of this from happening. But deep down, I know that I did everything I could. The truth is, you can't control what other people choose to believe. David and I haven't spoken since I left. I've heard through mutual acquaintances that he's doing well, that he's in college now, living his life. I don't hold any ill will toward him. In some ways, I even feel sorry for him. He was just a kid, caught up in whatever emotions or confusion led him to make that accusation. I've forgiven him, though I doubt he knows that. As for Laura, I've let go of any hope that we might reconcile. Our marriage wasn't perfect, but I loved her, and I know she loved me. Still, love isn't always enough to overcome the kind of damage that David's lie caused. I hope she's found peace in her life, that she's happy with the choices she's made. I wish her nothing but the best. Even though our paths have diverged, life after leaving has been an adjustment. I've had to rebuild, to find a new sense of normalcy. It hasn't been easy, but I've learned to live with the choices I made. I've learned that sometimes, walking away is the only option, even if it means leaving behind the people you care about. My marriage and family life, once filled with hope and possibility, is now just a memory. It's something I look back on with a mixture of sadness and acceptance. I did what I had to do to protect myself, to find peace in the midst of chaos. And in the end, that's all anyone can do. Make the choices that feel right, even when they come at a great cost. As the months turned into years, the weight of what had happened began to settle in more deeply. It wasn't just the immediate loss of my marriage or the fracture of my life as a stepfather. It was the aftershocks, the lingering effects that rippled through every part of my existence. The sense of betrayal and the doubts that others held about me never fully disappeared. Those who had once been close to me seemed to drift away, not because they explicitly believed David's accusation, but because they didn't know how to handle the situation. People tend to shy away from discomfort, and my story had become one of discomfort for those around me. I learned how isolating it could be when your character is questioned, even if no one says it outright. The whispers behind my back, the hesitation in people's eyes when they talked to me, all of it added to the sense of loneliness that had taken root. I found myself withdrawing from the few social circles I still had left, preferring solitude over the constant sense of being judged. For a long time, I wrestled with guilt, even though I knew I hadn't done anything wrong. It was the guilt of watching a family unravel, of knowing that despite my efforts, I couldn't hold it together. There's an odd shame in walking away from something you've invested so much of yourself in, even when you know that staying would have been the wrong choice. Every now and then, I would catch myself wondering how things were for Laura and David. I avoided asking mutual acquaintances for updates, though occasionally, someone would mention something in passing. They seemed to be doing fine, which was both a relief and a bitter pill to swallow. It was hard not to feel replaced, as though my absence had simply been absorbed into their lives, leaving no trace of the years I had spent trying to be a part of their family. But over time, I began to realize that this was less about them and more about me. I had spent so long focusing on the fallout of my departure, on the pain of being falsely accused, that I hadn't allowed myself to move forward. I was stuck in a loop of what had happened, replaying the events in my mind as if searching for a way to change the outcome. But no matter how many times I replayed it, the result was always the same. It took a while, but eventually, I began to rebuild, not just my life, but my sense of self. The process was slow, and there were setbacks along the way. Trust, once shattered, is hard to restore, even within yourself. I found it difficult to trust my own judgment, to believe that I could make good decisions after the way things had turned out. But I worked at it. I forced myself to take small steps, to re-enter the world bit by bit. I started by focusing on my career. Work had always been a place where I felt competent and capable, and diving into it gave me a sense of purpose again. I threw myself into projects, took on more responsibility, and slowly began to regain the confidence that had been stripped away from me. The more I accomplished at work, the more I felt like I was regaining control over my life. Outside of work, I kept my social interactions minimal. I wasn't ready to trust people again, not in the way I had before. The idea of letting anyone close, of opening myself up to another potential betrayal, was too much, so I kept my circle small, mostly coworkers and acquaintances I could interact with at a surface level. It was safer that way. There were moments when I considered dating again, but the thought of building a new relationship from scratch seemed overwhelming. The idea of blending lives, of possibly stepping into another situation like the one I had just left, filled me with dread. How could I ever trust someone enough to let them into my life again, knowing how easily things could fall apart? So, I stayed single, focusing on myself and what I could control. In some ways, it was freeing. I no longer had to worry about anyone else's expectations. No longer had to bend myself to fit into a role that felt unnatural. I could just be me, without the pressure of trying to make a family work that had been broken from the start. But there were also moments of intense loneliness. The holidays were the worst, sitting in my quiet apartment, surrounded by the silence. I would think back to the Christmases and Thanksgivings I had spent with Laura and David. Even though those holidays had been tinged with tension, they had still been filled with the warmth of family. Now, it was just me. I tried not to let it get to me, but the emptiness was hard to ignore. In those moments, I would remind myself why I left. I would think back to the accusation, to the way David had looked at me with such cold certainty as he told Laura I had hit him. The memory still stung, but it also served as a reminder that I had made the right choice. Staying in that toxic environment would have destroyed me, no matter how much I had loved Laura or wanted to make things work. Sometimes, walking away is the only way to save yourself. As the years passed, I found a new sense of peace. It wasn't the life I had envisioned for myself, but it was mine, and I was learning to make the most of it. I took up hobbies I had long neglected, spent more time focusing on my health and well-being, and even reconnected with old friends who had drifted away over the years. Slowly, the pieces of my life began to come together in a way that felt manageable. One day, out of the blue, I received a letter. It was from David. The sight of his name on the envelope sent a rush of emotions through me. Anger, sadness, confusion. I wasn't sure if I wanted to open it, but curiosity got the better of me. In the letter, David apologized. He explained that he had been going through a difficult time, struggling with feelings he didn't understand, and had lashed out at me because I was the easiest target. He admitted that he had lied about the accusation and that he knew the damage it had caused. He didn't expect forgiveness, but he wanted me to know that he regretted what he had done. I sat there, staring at the letter for what felt like hours. Part of me felt a sense of relief. Finally, the truth was out, but another part of me was angry. Angry that it had taken him so long to come clean. Angry that his lie had cost me so much. I had lost my marriage, my family, and years of my life because of his actions. A simple apology couldn't change that. I never responded to the letter. I wasn't ready, and maybe I never will be, but receiving it allowed me to close that chapter of my life. I no longer needed to question what had happened. No longer needed to wonder if I had done something wrong. I hadn't. The truth, though delayed, had finally come to light. Today, I live a quiet, simple life. It's not the life I had once imagined, but it's mine. I've found peace in solitude, in the knowledge that I made the right choices for myself. Even when they were difficult, I don't know what the future holds, but I'm no longer weighed down by the past. Life is unpredictable. It can change in an instant, shattering everything you thought was solid. But with time, with effort, and with resilience, it's possible to rebuild. I'm living proof of that. And though the scars from my past remain, they no longer define me. I've moved on, I've healed, and I'm finally free.